Hi, my name is Nicole Baker, and this is my presentation of our case study regarding internet use violations threats over the World Wide Web. My first section of the presentation is going to cover the identification of the problem and also the analysis of the problem. Here's what we do know so far from this case. Just the facts. Roosevelt High School draws from an affluent area. Miss Walker is a second-year science teacher, and she has struggled with parent and student dissatisfaction in the past. Dissatisfaction not only with her method of instruction, but also with the workload that she gives her students. Although Dr. Forbes, the principal, has worked with Miss Walker to suggest improvements, she has not been able to implement his suggestions. Um, Dr. Forbes, in the case, it was mentioned that he really has worked hard to hire highly qualified staff members, and she meets those highly qualified kind of qualifications that Dr. Forbes has set, but maybe is having some difficulties in the classroom, even with support. In addition, we know that over a long weekend, Miss Walker received an anonymous email with a link to a website. The website contained vulgar language and commentary, not only about Miss Walker's class, but also about her personal life. And most concerning was the final line of the website, a comment that said, "Who wants Miss Walker to disappear?" Indicating that maybe in some way this was a type of death threat. Miss Walker definitely felt that the website was a death threat, so she called Dr. Forbes. He printed the page and called her back to say it was probably a prank, but he would certainly investigate the next day. He also asked Miss Walker if there were any students who were particularly unhappy with her. Were they disruptive? Anyone disgruntled? And Miss Walker names a student, Randy Franks, as a potentially disgruntled or disruptive student. And because of fear for her safety, Miss Walker spends the night at her parents' that evening. Okay, so what do we need to know? There are a lot of questions we have. First being who created the website, who sent the email, what are Roosevelt High School's acceptable internet use policies, was the content created on a district-owned device, meaning that that content would have been created by most likely a student or parent of a student, and then what was the website creator's intent in making it? Was this meant to be truly a threat, or was it meant to be a prank, as the principal thought it might be? So here's the problem. Ms. Watson needs further instructional support to improve student stress and increase positive interaction with students. However, I wanted to make sure and put a little asterisk next to this problem because while Ms. Watson's instruction is a problem, it is not the problem that's associated with this case. The problem is that a student or someone else is possibly threatening Ms. Watson and her life. Another problem is a student or someone else may be in violation of the district acceptable internet use policy. And a problem is understanding what are my own district or Roosevelt High School's district handbook policies for a safe learning environment. So again, Ms. Watson's instruction is not the issue here. The issue is the threat or prank about the website and whether or not the Roosevelt High School handbook policies cover this for a safe learning environment. So for my next section, we have a proposed plan of action with appropriate strategies for implementation. Step 1 of the plan of action is determine who created the website and who sent the email. The first step, which Dr. Forbes suggested, was that he would interview students, including Randy and his friends, to see if one of those students in particular may have sent the email or know who sent the email or have some kind of information about who created the website. I think it's really important to say students, not just Randy and his friends, because we don't want to assume just because Ms. Watson has pointed to Randy as a potentially disgruntled student that he is our only person of interest for this case. We would also want to interview other staff members. Has anyone else had a similar experience? Has any other staff member had a website created about him or about her? especially with students who are angry or upset with them. And then finally, we'd like to have the district technology specialist, if we couldn't determine who sent the email or created the website beforehand, determine finally who sent the email, who created the website. It'd be nice to have some kind of specific confirmation, hard facts to back up and support our plan of action. So that district technology specialist was mentioned in the case as somebody who could track down who sent the email, and that would be a step I would certainly want to take. Okay, plan of action step 2. Determine appropriate consequences for the individual who created the website. And again, here I said the individual who created the website because at this moment we don't know exactly who it was. And we certainly don't want to jump to conclusions that this one student, for example, the one who was named Randy, is the one, making the assumption that he's the one who created it. So in terms of step 2, I would follow district internet use policy. Whatever our handbook stated is what I would do in terms of disciplinary action. I would certainly include parents in the disciplinary process, that is assuming that this was a student-created website. And then finally, after that disciplinary process was over, I would make sure to follow up again with that student later in the school year, just to make sure that he or she is on the right track and kind of moving forward and having more successful interactions with his or her teachers. And then my third step in my plan of action would be to review and revise the acceptable internet usage policies. Because the internet and technology is changing so quickly and our students are becoming so much better versed in that technology, I think it's really important that we maintain very up-to-date standards for internet usage. So I would make sure that students and staff members are protected from situations such as this. I would also consult the district legal team to make sure all of our bases are covered in terms of our usage policies and our staff and student safety. And also I would propose usage policies as a topic of conversation with colleagues. And by colleagues, I mean potentially other building level administrators in the district. So for example, other high school level administrators within whatever district Roosevelt High School resides, or possibly at some kind of convention or conference, somewhere where I would be collaborating with others who are in similar positions, kind of posing this as a what would you do scenario, and having a productive academically based conversation about policy and cases. The next section asks, what is best for students? How do we resolve the issue based on promoting the success of all students? Here's my rationale for the resolution. To promote the success of all students, what we have to do first and foremost is treat all students fairly and with respect. We can't accuse students of internet misuse. So, for example, just because Randy Franks was disruptive does not mean he was the culprit. And we have to consider Ms. Watson's feelings of alarm and act quickly to resolve the problem and create a safe environment so that she can teach without interruption and promote student success in her classroom. So really, it's Ms. Watson and the students who we have to consider as we promote that success. And finally, we want to debrief the problem by reflecting. So in terms of reflection, the first thing is, what was I thinking about? I was thinking as I reflected on this, how can I treat all involved parties with equity and fairness and not jump to any conclusions or assumptions either about Ms. Watson, first of all, or about the students. It's unfair to let prior experiences with staff or students bias you for the way you approach a case. So even though I know that Ms. Watson had needed support in terms of creating a positive learning environment with her students and that she had kind of unhappy and disgruntled parents, I really want to make sure that I would put that bias aside when I go into looking at this problem, because again, the problem was not Ms. Watson's instruction, the problem was the website. I also was thinking, how would I feel if I were Ms. Watson? I remember being a second-year teacher, and it's hard, it's really hard. Being an authority in the classroom, especially when you're a little bit on the younger side, can be a difficult situation. And if I were really scared and wanting to sleep at my parents', that would be a pretty dire situation for me. Then I was thinking, how can this become a learning experience for my staff and my students? In terms of what was I was feeling concerned first and foremost for staff safety and student safety. We live in a pretty violent school climate these days, and unfortunately, violence in schools is something we see. It's at least, unfortunately, something that we see on the news with some frequency. So my first feeling was a feeling of concern for safety. I was also unhappy that Miss Watson had not taken the principal's earlier recommendations about instruction to kind of change the climate in her own classroom. And not to be frustrated with Miss Watson, but only because I would have been really great if the situation, could have been avoided in the first place. Um, I was feeling interested in the technological abilities of others, especially of students. They are capable of so much more than some days than I feel I'm capable of in terms of navigating the internet and creating websites and sending anonymous emails. So I thought that was something that had me feeling a little bit worried and interested. And then I also felt a need to review and revise acceptable use policies, and it reminded me of how those are going to have to be reviewed on a fairly regular basis. What was I valuing? Staff feelings of safety, as well as students' trust in staff and administrators, a positive climate in the building, parental involvement, and high standards for students. I value all of those things, and I think I kept those in mind certainly as I evaluated the problem. And then what were the unresolved issues or needs for further investigation? My first thought about unresolved issues, how can we really prevent this from happening again? It seems like a pretty, maybe not necessarily an easy thing for a student to accomplish, but it doesn't seem to me like it would be that difficult. So how can we really stop this from happening? And in that way, how can the principal affect change in a teacher's classroom in terms of creating a positive climate and helping that teacher create a positive environment? I also wondered something that needs to be investigated further is what other cyberbullying or internet issues are occurring at Roosevelt High School. I'd like to assemble some kind of task force or team to investigate what else is kind of out there on the internet in terms of the teachers and the students in the building. And then I also, something that was kind of unresolved for me was, should the principal hire highly qualified teachers without teaching experience? Is there something about this teacher's lack of experience in the classroom that contributed to the situation? My instinct is no. My instinct is that everyone needs to start somewhere, and that experience just builds on itself, and that's how we come up with really great teachers is seeing someone who's highly qualified and the teaching potential that he or she may have, even if she doesn't have it at that moment. So something to think about, although something I don't know that I would necessarily agree with. And those are my thoughts on the case. I really enjoyed working through this. It kind of made me really feel like I needed to put on my administrator hat and think a little bit more like a building leader, which it was a really fun experience. So thanks very much.